Hello and welcome to this tutorial. Today we're going to look at what we mean by array index out of bounds exception. That is when you create an array and you happen to call an element which is outside the range of the index of the array, then we have an exception called the array index out of bounds exception. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a program and I'll call it array exception so that we look at what we mean by array index out of bounds exception. Alright, so public started void main. Okay, let me clear this. Alright, so what I'm going to do is that I'm going to initialize an array of characters here. So this array of characters, okay, and of course it's an array of characters. I'm calling it alphabet. So I have A here and B. Alright, C here, D, and this one I'm calling it E. Okay, so this is my array of characters. Now what I want to do here is that I want to print out the contents of this array. So if you want to print out the contents, you first have to type the name or the reference variable of the array. So I have alphabet, so you type it, then you use square brackets. So you bring square bracket, and if you want to print the first element, then you put 0 in. You see, so for an array, the elements, the index of the elements begin from 0. So if you look at what we have here, we have 5 elements. We have A, B, C, D, E. So the element A is at index 0, the element B is at index 1, C 2, D 3, and E is 4. So right now I've called alphabet 0. It means that I want to print the elements in the alphabet array at index 0, and of course that should be A. So when I execute this function, what I'm gonna see is the character A. So let's see. Alright, so we see A down here. Okay, so we see A here. If I change this to 1, I'm going to see B because B is at the index 1 here. Okay, so I see B here. If I change it to 2, I'm going to see C because C is at index 2. So we have 0, 1, 2. And when I run it, I'm going to see C. Wow. And of course, if I change this to 3, I'm going to see D because D is at index 3 because we have 0, 1, 2, 3, D here. Cool. So we have D also here, and of course E will be at index 4. So let me change that and also C. Good. You see, one big problem for beginners is that they forget that when you are dealing with arrays, the index begins from 0. So if somebody wants to print the element at A, most of them so if somebody wants to print the element at A, most of them or some of them may use the index 1, but that is not the case because it begins from 0. You have to use 0. But we have a problem if we try to read beyond the array. One very common error is that if you look at the elements of the array, as I did say, we begin from 0, we count from 0, the index is from 0. But if I want to print the last element here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that is the 5th element. But that should be at index 4 because I'm counting from 0. That should be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. But if I forget, and I think that because it is the 5th element, it is at index 5, look at what is going to happen here. If I put in 5 here, I am reading beyond the array. So I'm reading beyond the, yes, and I have a bunch of statements here. I have exception in thread main java.lang array index out of bounds exception. So there is an exception happening here, and I'm told that it's happening right at the exception array exception that is here. So when I click this, I am taken to the line that I have the exception, and of course I cannot have the element at index 5 because my array does not guarantee that. I have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Although I have 5 elements, the E, that is the last element I want to print, is not at index 5. It is at index 4 because I begin from 0. So that is what we mean by array index out of bounds exception. Of course, you've gone beyond the bounds of the array. And when you have a scenario like this, you can handle this. As a programmer, you must look for potential exceptions so that you handle it. And if you want to handle this exception, you can use a try statement. So this is what I'm going to do. Because I am reading the content of an array, there is a possibility that an array index out of bounds exception will occur. So what I will do is that I'll create a try statement, and the statement that I think going to throw this kind of exception, so it's possible that it can throw an exception. What I will do is that I'll put it into the try statement. So that is what I'm going to have here. Alright, so what I'm doing here is that I want you to try to execute this. So anytime that you write a try, you follow it with a catch or a finally statement. So that is what I'm going to do. So right after that, try execute this statement, and because I think there is a potential exception and I want you to catch the exception. So what kind of exception is it? I'm reading from the content of an array. There's a possibility that there will be array index out of bounds exception. So I want you to catch an array index out of bounds exception. So I'm declaring a variable e to arrest that type of exception here. That is the array index out of bounds exception here. Now when you arrest it, so what will happen here is that the program will execute the content of the try statement, and if any exception, that is array index out of bounds exception, occurs, then it will move down here to the catch statement. Then it will execute the content of this catch. I've not put anything here, so let me try to put something here. If I write something like this, and I'll say sorry, you are trying to read beyond the bounds of the array. So I'm trying to tell, instead of the program throwing this and bringing my program to a halt or crashing it, I'm writing exceptions to handle these possible errors that can happen in my program. So if I run it, of course, I cannot get the content of the fifth element, sorry, the sixth element, which is at index 5. So an array index out of bounds exception is going to happen, and this variable will capture, or it will arrest this array index out of bounds exception, and I'll have sorry, you are trying to read beyond the bounds of the array printed out to the console. Alright, so sorry, you are trying to read beyond the bounds of the array. But what if I try to execute this? What if I try to find the element at the third index? Of course, that is the fourth element, and that will be D 0 1 2 3. So this one I can find the element. I'm not reading beyond, so the catch is not going to execute. The try will execute, and that will be okay. So I will have this. Of course, I see D because that is at 0 1 2 3, so that is the third one. In the same vein, if I try to put in 4, that is at the fourth index, and that is E, I'm going to have E. Once again, you see that the catch statement does not execute. So the try catch is used to handle exceptions. So if nothing happens, fine, the try statement will execute normally. But if an exception occurs, then you have to catch it and try to handle it gracefully. So in the same vein, so if I put in let me say index like 8, I'm going far beyond the boundaries or the reach of the array, and I'm going to have the same thing. Sorry, you are trying to read beyond the bounds of the array. So that is what we mean by array index out of bounds exception. That is when you try to read beyond the range of the array, an exception is thrown, which is called array index out of bounds exception.